You've been told that if you're just nice enough, caring enough, available enough, she'll choose you. You've been led to believe that pleasing her is how you win her heart. So you listen more than you speak. You agree when you disagree. You show up when she snaps her fingers. You give and give your time, your energy, your presence, because deep down you think that's what a good man does. But the truth is, trying to please her is slowly destroying your masculinity. Every time you silence your voice to avoid conflict, you chip away at your authority. Every time you abandon your standards to keep her interested, you lose your center. You've made her approval your compass, her attention your reward. And in doing so, you've put her in the position of power while you quietly disappear. That isn't love. That's imbalance. And no woman respects a man who's constantly bending just to keep her happy. What you're really doing is negotiating your worth. You believe that if you meet all her needs, if you never upset her, if you show her how devoted you are, then she'll finally see your value. But in reality, what she sees is a man who's lost himself, a man who doesn't know where he stands unless she tells him, a man who's afraid to say no, afraid to lead, afraid to walk away. That doesn't inspire attraction. That triggers boredom or worse, contempt. A woman doesn't want to be the center of your life. She wants to be a part of it. She doesn't want to lead you. She wants to be led by a man who knows who he is and where he's going. When your entire identity becomes about making her happy, you lose the very thing she was drawn to in the first place. Your edge, your decisiveness, your purpose. Masculinity isn't about dominance, it's about direction, it's about presence. And when you give all of that away for the sake of harmony, you become passive, reactive, and forgettable. Trying to please her makes you hesitant. It makes you anxious. It makes you second-guess your every move. You're constantly walking on eggshells, worried that one wrong step will make her lose interest. But what you don't realize is that your fear of losing her is the very thing that's making you lose yourself. You can't lead from fear. You can't protect, guide, or inspire if you're constantly worried about being liked. Women don't want a man who's easy to manipulate. They want a man they can trust to be solid, consistent, and unshakable. When you stop trying to please her, you give her something far more valuable. Truth. And truth is magnetic. When you start saying what you actually think, when you start making decisions without needing her approval, when you start living your life on your own terms, you reclaim your power. That power doesn't just make you more attractive, it makes you more fulfilled. You stop obsessing over whether she's happy and start asking whether you are. You stop seeking her validation and start respecting your own standards. And the irony is, when you do that, you become the kind of man she can't ignore. Not because you're chasing her, but because you're chasing purpose. Not because you're bending for her approval, but because you're standing in your truth. That kind of man is rare. That kind of man is respected. That kind of man doesn't need to prove anything. He just is. And in that presence, she feels something she can't quite explain, safety, clarity, and admiration. So stop trying to please her. Start leading. Start living. Start being the man who doesn't need to be chosen, because he's already chosen himself. You may think you're doing the right thing, being supportive, agreeable, and constantly showing up for her needs. You're always there when she calls. You cancel your plans if she needs you. You agree with her opinions even when they conflict with what you truly believe. You let things slide just to keep the peace. But slowly, and without realizing it, you begin to lose the very essence of who you are. You stop thinking for yourself, stop leading, stop making your own decisions. And all of it is in the name of being the good guy, the man who pleases her. But here's the reality. Every time you ignore your own voice to follow hers, you chip away at your identity. What you call love or devotion is often a disguised fear of rejection. You believe that if you can keep her happy, she'll stay. If you never upset her, she won't leave. So you sacrifice your own truth. You shrink. You mold yourself into what you think she wants, and in doing so, you begin to vanish. This doesn't happen all at once. It's slow. You start by changing a few opinions to align with hers. Then you start avoiding conflict because you don't want her to be upset. You become hesitant to express what you want because you don't want to seem selfish or demanding. Soon enough, you're living a life that's shaped more by her preferences than your own purpose. And with every silent compromise, you give away a part of your masculinity. Masculinity isn't about being dominant or forceful. It's about being rooted in who you are, what you value, what you stand for. It's about moving with clarity, making decisions from a place of strength, and having a life that reflects your own standards. But when your focus shifts from living your truth to managing her emotions, you surrender that masculine presence. You no longer act from inner conviction, you act from outer approval. And that changes how you show up in the world. You start overthinking your actions. You constantly evaluate your words, your tone, your decisions based on how she might react. Instead of being bold and certain, you become cautious and agreeable. You live in reaction mode, not creation mode. You're not building your life. You're adjusting to hers. And that isn't leadership. That isn't attraction. That's submission dressed as affection. The more you please, the less she feels you. She can sense when a man is not grounded. She can feel when you're walking on eggshells. And while she may appreciate the comfort temporarily, over time she loses trust. Not because you're unkind, but because you're not solid. A man who has no boundaries, no spine, no voice of his own cannot provide real security. He becomes emotionally dependent, and emotional dependency is not masculine. It's needy, it's fragile, and you feel it too, even if you never admit it. There's a quiet frustration growing inside you. You start to resent her, not because of anything she's doing, but because deep down you're angry with yourself for how much of you you've given up. You miss your fire. You miss your independence. You miss making choices without fear. And that internal conflict, trying to be good while feeling weak, eats away at your confidence. This is how you lose attraction. This is how you lose power. This is how you become the man she no longer desires. Not because you weren't enough, but because you stopped being yourself. You thought making her happy was the key to love. But love built on self-abandonment can't last, because no woman can fully love a man who doesn't fully respect himself. Reclaiming your masculinity doesn't mean you stop caring. It doesn't mean you become selfish or cold. It means you stop outsourcing your identity. It means you remember that your thoughts, your values, your truth matter just as much as hers. It means you start showing up from a place of strength, not from a place of fear. It means you stop asking, what does she want me to be? And start asking, who am I? And how do I lead from that place? You can still be kind. You can still be supportive. But you must be those things from a place of fullness, not from a place of desperation to be liked or kept. When you give your power away to keep someone, you will eventually lose both. But when you keep your power, you give others the opportunity to truly love who you are, not the version of you created to keep the peace. You were never meant to live in her shadow. You were never meant to orbit around her mood. You were meant to be whole on your own, with your own mind, your own mission, your own fire. And only when you live from that place can you offer something real, not just to her, but to the world. When your entire focus becomes pleasing her, you unknowingly hand over your power. You start making her approval the measurement of your worth. You tiptoe around your truth, hoping to keep her happy, thinking that if you're easygoing enough, agreeable enough, emotionally available enough, she'll stick around. But what actually happens is something you don't expect. She starts losing respect for you. Not because you're a bad person, but because you've placed her above yourself. You've made her the center of your universe, and in doing so, you've stepped out of your masculine frame. When you make her opinion your compass, you stop being a leader in your own life. Every move you make is filtered through her preferences. You hesitate before speaking in case your words don't align with what she wants to hear. You overanalyze texts, wait for her responses, and adjust your behavior based on how she reacts. Slowly, your sense of direction fades. You don't move with clarity anymore. You move with caution. And she feels it. Women instinctively test a man's emotional strength, not maliciously, but unconsciously. She wants to know if you're rooted, if you're solid enough to hold your ground even when she pushes. And when you fail that test by giving in too easily, she doesn't feel safe. She feels responsible. Responsible for steering the relationship, for setting the tone, for leading emotionally. That responsibility turns to pressure, and pressure turns to frustration. And the man she once admired begins to look more like a burden than a partner. You may think you're doing the right thing. You think you're being thoughtful. You think your sacrifices show how much you care. But real care isn't about constant accommodation. Real care involves presence, strength, and leadership. A woman wants to feel your masculine frame, not just your support. She wants to feel like you can handle her emotions without absorbing them, like you can challenge her respectfully without collapsing at the first sign of disagreement. The moment you start over-compromising to maintain peace, the dynamic shifts. She begins to see you not as a grounded man, but as someone she can influence at will. And that influence might stroke her ego for a while, but it doesn't inspire admiration. Because admiration doesn't come from control, it comes from polarity. Polarity between strength and softness, between direction and receptivity. When you surrender your direction to gain her favor, you kill the polarity that created attraction in the first place. She doesn't want to make all the decisions. She doesn't want to shape the relationship on her own. She may say she wants a nice guy, a sensitive guy, a guy who listens and adapts, but she doesn't want one who vanishes in the process. She doesn't want to be the sun while you orbit around her like a planet. She wants a man who is his own sun. A man who stands tall and bright in his own identity. A man who respects himself enough to say, this is who I am and this is how I live. When you hand her the position of power by constantly deferring, you reverse the roles. You begin to act more like the pursuer of harmony, and she becomes the evaluator of your worth. And that's when things get confusing. You wonder why she becomes distant. You wonder why she stops responding with the same energy. You wonder why, the more effort you put in, the less she seems to value it. But the answer is simple. You've stopped being a challenge. You've stopped being a man she can look up to. You've become predictable, safe, and overly available, and that doesn't create desire. It creates comfort and eventually indifference. A woman respects a man who knows when to say no. She respects a man who doesn't fear her disappointment, who isn't afraid to challenge her gently, who can hold tension without folding. That doesn't mean being aggressive or dismissive. It means being steady. It means being a man of principle, not preference. When you operate from your values instead of her moods, she feels it. And that's where trust begins, not when you give her everything, but when she sees that you won't give up yourself for her. This doesn't mean you become cold or detached. It means you remember who you are. You make decisions from clarity, not emotion. You listen, but you don't surrender your backbone. You care, but not at the cost of self-respect. That's when the dynamic rebalances. That's when she looks at you not just with affection, but with respect. Because you're no longer seeking her validation. You're not trying to earn her love. You're standing in your truth and inviting her to meet you there. You can't be respected if you're constantly adjusting to gain approval. Respect comes when you have something to stand on, when you know who you are, what you want, and where you're going. When you lead with presence instead of permission, you regain the power you've been giving away. And in doing so, you become the kind of man who isn't controlled by her emotions, but who knows how to hold space for them while still moving forward with his own. That's the balance. That's where real strength lives. Masculine energy is deeply tied to purpose. It's not about being loud, forceful, or controlling. It's about having direction, about waking up in the morning with a mission, something that drives you beyond just survival or comfort. When a man is living in alignment with that inner compass, his presence changes. He becomes focused, stable, and magnetic. But when that purpose is replaced with people-pleasing, especially the compulsive need to please a woman, something in him begins to fade. A man disconnected from his purpose is a man who begins to drift. He's no longer anchored to anything deeper than the next opportunity to gain approval or validation. He starts organizing his day, his behavior, and even his identity around someone else's needs. He might convince himself that he's just being supportive or considerate, but what he's actually doing is abandoning the very trait that makes him masculine, his clarity of purpose. Women may say they want a man who puts them first, but in reality, what they're drawn to is a man who puts his purpose first and then invites her into that mission. A man with purpose doesn't become emotionally entangled in trying to be everything for her. He knows who he is and what he's building. He doesn't wait on her text to decide how his day will go. He doesn't cancel his plans or lose focus just because she's upset. That doesn't make him unloving. It makes him grounded. It makes him trustworthy. When you're constantly trying to please her, you end up treating the relationship like a job you could get fired from. You start walking on eggshells, adjusting your mood, your voice, even your goals to avoid upsetting her. And in doing so, you silence your mission. You start acting from fear of rejection, fear of not being enough, fear of not being needed. That fear creates emotional dependency, and emotional dependency is the opposite of masculine strength. Masculinity is not about being stoic or emotionally unavailable. It's about emotional responsibility. When a man is purpose-driven, he doesn't need a woman to complete him. He wants a woman who complements him. He doesn't collapse under the weight of emotions, hers or his. He navigates them without losing his path. His focus remains on the bigger picture. That's what makes him a safe and attractive presence. He doesn't chase approval. He leads with vision. Too many men get caught in the trap of thinking that love means sacrifice, and while love does include sacrifice, it should never require self-erasure. When you abandon your purpose to win someone over, you betray the deepest part of yourself. You start shaping your life around temporary affection instead of long-term fulfillment. That's not strength. That's survival mode dressed up as romance. And over time, it will make you resentful toward her and, more dangerously, toward yourself. You see, a woman might enjoy the attention at first. She might like being the center of your world, but eventually she will start to notice the lack of direction. She'll begin to feel like she's leading, like she's the one with the clearer vision, and that imbalance will make her feel unsafe. Because when a man loses himself in a woman, the woman begins to feel like she's in the relationship alone. Not because you're not there physically, but because your inner core, your masculine fire, is missing. Being a man of purpose means you make decisions based on where you're going, not based on what will make someone temporarily happy. It means you're willing to say no to distractions, even if they come in the form of love. It means your actions are guided by values, not by moods. That kind of man doesn't need to chase affection because he naturally attracts it. His certainty is magnetic, his clarity is contagious, and his consistency is rare. Relationships thrive when both people bring their wholeness to the table. You don't need to prove your worth by constantly adjusting, fixing, or pleasing. Your worth is in your ability to stay connected to your mission while being present with someone else. That's what creates admiration. That's what creates desire. When a woman sees that you are building something real, when she sees that you won't compromise your path just to stay in her good graces, she begins to see you not as an option, but as a leader. This is not about being rigid. It's not about refusing to listen or adapt. It's about leading with direction instead of insecurity. It's about making her feel like she's with someone who knows where he's going. Because no woman wants to be the driver in a relationship with a man. She wants to be able to relax, to soften, to trust. And she can only do that when you're living from a place of purpose. So if you've been losing yourself in the process of trying to please, stop. Take a step back. Ask yourself, what matters to me? What am I building? Where am I going? Let those answers guide your energy. Let your purpose lead. Because when you stop trying to be everything for her and start becoming everything you were born to be, that's when you step into your true masculine strength. And that's when the relationship becomes something deeper, not based on control or comfort, but on real, grounded connection. You might think that always agreeing, always saying the right thing, and always doing what she wants is the fastest way to her heart. But what you're actually doing is slowly killing her attraction to you. Because while many men are conditioned to believe that pleasing a woman is what makes her happy, the truth is far more nuanced. What really builds connection, what truly inspires respect, is your honesty, your conviction, and your willingness to lead with truth, even when that truth is uncomfortable. When you constantly comply, constantly smooth things over, and constantly fold to avoid conflict, you're not being kind, you're being avoidant. And women can feel it. They might not always say it out loud, but they sense when a man is speaking to avoid confrontation rather than to express who he really is. Over time, that avoidance turns into emotional invisibility. You become just another man trying to keep her instead of standing up and owning who you are. Attraction isn't rooted in agreement. It's rooted in polarity, in the tension between two strong, grounded individuals who aren't afraid to challenge each other respectfully. When you always go along with her views, when you let her lead every emotional or relational decision, she starts to feel alone in the dynamic. Not because you're not present, but because you're not showing up with your own sense of self. It's important to understand that women don't respect a man who is afraid to disagree with them. They don't respect a man who says yes to everything just to avoid making waves. Why? Because it feels inauthentic. It feels manipulative. She might not frame it that way consciously, but at the emotional level, she begins to perceive your constant compliance as weakness, and that weakens the attraction between you. The man who earns a woman's long-term respect is the one who tells her the truth. Not the truth that flatters her, not the truth that's convenient, but the truth that reveals who he is. That doesn't mean being rude or harsh. It means being unshakably honest. It means saying, I hear you, but I don't agree, and holding that position with strength and grace. It means showing her that your sense of self doesn't depend on her mood or her approval. Most men are so afraid of upsetting a woman that they filter everything they say. They nod when they don't mean it. They apologize when they've done nothing wrong. They hide their boundaries, their desires, even their values, all in the name of being good enough. But ironically, that's exactly what makes them less attractive, because no woman wants a man who disappears behind politeness. She wants a man who is kind, yes, but also bold. A man who can disagree with her without becoming defensive or desperate. When you lead with truth, you're not trying to control her or dominate her. You're simply anchoring yourself in who you are. And that is what creates real security in a relationship. A woman feels safest when she knows you won't lie to her just to keep the peace. She feels safest when she sees that you're willing to tell her what she needs to hear, not just what she wants to hear. That level of honesty builds trust. It builds depth, and it makes her feel like she's with a man, not a mirror. Stop believing that your role in a relationship is to make her happy. Your role is to be the most honest, grounded, purpose-driven version of yourself. From that space, you give her something real to respond to. You invite her into your world, not because you need her to validate it, but because it's strong enough to include her without collapsing. This kind of authenticity requires courage. It requires facing the fear that she might not like what you have to say. But if your connection can't survive your truth, it's not the kind of connection worth building. Too many men silence themselves in exchange for temporary comfort and end up with women who don't admire them, don't respect them, and eventually don't desire them. Don't be that man. Don't trade your truth for peace. Trade your fear for strength. When you stop chasing her approval and start living from your truth, you show her a version of masculinity that's rare. A masculinity that isn't about dominance or control, but about consistency, self-respect, and clarity. That's what women crave, not perfection, not constant praise, but a partner who is emotionally solid and honest enough to be real. Remember, a woman might flirt with a man who always agrees, but she falls in love with the one who makes her feel something deeper. She respects the man who won't bend just to impress her. She opens up to the man who's brave enough to lead, not by controlling her, but by guiding the relationship with clarity and principle. The truth will challenge her at times. It might upset her, but if it's spoken with love and confidence, it becomes the very thing that strengthens the bond. It shows her that she's not alone in the relationship. It shows her that you're not just there to make her feel good, but to make the relationship real, deep, and lasting. So stop trying to be her emotional servant, be her partner, speak your truth, lead with conviction, because the moment you do, you stop being a man who pleases, and you become a man who is deeply respected, admired, and desired. When you build your identity around pleasing her, you slowly lose the very traits that make you attractive in the first place. You dilute your masculinity, weaken your presence, and forfeit your purpose, all in exchange for approval that never truly satisfies. True strength isn't found in constant agreement or emotional servitude. It's found in your ability to lead with integrity, live with purpose, speak with honesty, and stand firm in your values, even when it's uncomfortable. The man she respects, desires, and trusts is the one who's unafraid to be himself, even if that means not always being liked. Stop living for her validation. Start living from your core. That's where your power is. That's where your masculinity thrives. And that's the kind of man who doesn't just get attention. He earns admiration.